I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, remained there until I graduated from high school. Then I left, went to live in Brooklyn, New York. I'm the oldest of 5 children: Charles, Rose, Martha, and Alvin. Alvin is now deceased. He was drowned in 1973. My parents were John and Martha Miles, both of whom were born in Virginia. John Miles was a very strong, self-made man. He was a very stern, but had a good sense of humor. Loved to play practical jokes. Had a mischievous smile. Loved to fish. He left home in Virginia when he was a young teenager. Lived in Pennsylvania for a while, and then came to Baltimore, went in the Army, and after his discharge, he took up residency in Baltimore. He worked as a tailor for many years. He worked at Edgewood Arsenal as a guard. But when he opened his first tailor shop, he had worked in other cleaning and pressing and alteration establishments, but when he got his very own, he was so proud, and he was careful not to purchase a business unless he could pay his bills. So he was, before the deal was concluded, he was assured by the previous owner that there were no outstanding bills. So needless to say, he was kind of upset when a bill collector appeared. Well, actually he came to turn the gas and electric off. And Daddy told the man that he had paid already. The man insisted, no, he had orders to turn it off. So Daddy said, well, look, I promise you, tomorrow I will go down and we'll get this straight. The man says, no, I was sent out to turn that off today. And he looked toward the cellar door, the basement door, and he started walking toward the door. And Daddy said, he turned to him and said, if you go down those stairs, you won't come up. Oh dear. Yeah. And the man walked away. And the next day, Daddy went to the gas and electric company and got it straight. Both Mother and Daddy were very strong Christian. They had very strong Christian backgrounds. And they loved their family and their church. They were very proud people. They worked very hard. Daddy learned tailoring business through apprenticeship until he was able to establish a business for himself. He also learned to play a musical instrument that is not well known to a lot of people. It's musical saw. He first heard the sound of saws when he was a little boy down in Virginia, running around playing in the field. There was a sawmill nearby, and he used to hear the ringing of the saws, and he would say, bet you could make music with those things. It wasn't until some years later when, as a young man, he had his own tailor shop Sometimes business was good, sometimes not. When he had spare time, he used to browse through magazines. One day he found an article that advertised a musical saw. He wrote to this company that produced this instrument. It's located somewhere in Chicago, I think. And he mailed, ordered this instrument, paid $19 for it. And then he had the instrument, but he didn't know how to play it. So he took lessons through correspondence. Every couple of weeks, he would purchase a new set of lessons through the mail. And he didn't tell anyone about this instrument while he was learning to play it. Finally, after about 2 years, he came out of the closet, so to speak. He made known that he had this instrument, and he was able to play it. And he continued playing. He was a young man then, but he continued playing that instrument until he was about 90 years old, about 5 years or so prior to his death. He played all those years at different churches, mostly churches, in Baltimore, Virginia, Delaware, New York. Most of his engagements were at various churches, but he also had some engagements at reputable music halls, one of which was the Meyerhoff in Baltimore, Maryland. And I remember a couple of occasions when he came up from Baltimore to New York. He also he loved music. He sang with the choir at Shiloh Baptist Church, and my earliest memories of him in the choir are when I was a little girl, about 4 years old, and he used to take me up in the choir with him, and you know how kids fidget. I was sitting on the organist's bench, shifting around, fidgeting, and I slipped down off the bench, and my foot hit one of those pedals, and this loud sound burst out throughout the church, interrupting the service. Anyway, seriously, he sang in the church choir for many years. And one Men's Day, there was a special chorus assembled to perform on Men's Day, and it was called the White's Male Chorus. This is named after its director, George White. Anyway, from this one day's service, they decided to keep the chorus ongoing, and he belonged to that chorus from a young man until his death, close to his death. Baltimore was very segregated when I grew up. I have some vivid memories of acts of discrimination. That was the unpleasant side of my childhood. But on the pleasant side, it was much safer, much cleaner, much kinder environment than it is today. We had less as far as material things concerned, but we really had a good childhood. People felt comfortable for the children to play out of doors. people were mindful of their neighbors. They didn't destroy neighbors' property. They didn't litter. They respected the opinions of older people. It was just a, but I guess maybe it's it's not limited to Baltimore. Probably that's the situation uh, where most people live. Well, being the oldest had its good side and it had its bad side. The good side for me was the freedom to play games and out and be safe. You had more carefree uh, lifestyle, but being the oldest placed a lot of responsibility on me, and the memories are good and bad. Um, First, one thing it taught me responsibility. I had to help to take care of my siblings, and sometimes I got a little tired of that. But today I'm glad I had all those children. I'll never forget the day that I came home from school and found my mother and my father in the kitchen, Daddy at the kitchen table looking very somber, and Mother standing at the stove also looking very somber. And I said, "What's the matter?" I thought maybe one of their friends had died or something. But my mother murmured. She whispered, "You're going to have another little sister or brother." And I cried. I said, "I'm tired of taking care of babies." Of course, I'm sorry now. I know how it must have made my parents feel, but that's how I felt. I was tired of taking care of babies. Of course, today I wouldn't trade one of them. I'm glad that I had them. My mother had been ill for a while, just not feeling well, and misdiagnosed. And finally, when she uh, sought uh, new medical advice, she found that she had very advanced tuberculosis, and doctors recommended that she be hospitalized immediately. In fact, they wanted her to go from the hospital to uh, the sanatorium, as they called it. The next day, she went away, and she was hospitalized for 3.5 years. Initially, my two, well, at that time, I was about 14 years old. My brother Alvin was 3 years younger than I. Then my brother Charles, 10 years younger than I. My sister Rose, 12 years younger. And Martha, 14 years younger than I. So mind you now, I was only 14 myself. So it was not easy, but I give my father credit for being the strong man that he is and keeping his family together for those 3.5 years while my mother was hospitalized. There was a family that was willing to care for my two youngest sisters, and they did for a few months and would have continued. But my father insisted that he wanted to keep his family together, so he brought them home. And we made it. There was occasional help from social services, but that didn't last long. So anyway, he was a strong man. Well, first of all, one of her mottos was, "There's no such word as can't." She often said, "No such word as can't." And whatever she determined that she wanted to do, she accomplished. Uh, well, first I must say that my father only had a fifth grade education, and my mother only had seventh, eighth grade education. So they were not educated people, and formally educated, that is, but they were both very wise. Um, my mother was a wonderful salesperson. She could sell, as the expression goes, sell the Brooklyn Bridge. But she knew. In fact, I remember one instance. Our family had moved from Baltimore out to Edgewood, Maryland, and one day a salesman came through our development, knocking on doors and attempting to sell people refrigerators. Because that was before poor people had refrigerators. We had ice boxes. So he ended up, well, he came to sell my mother a refrigerator. She ended up buying the refrigerator, but she told him only if he bought some of her wares to make the first down payment. So she was able to sell him some of her embroidery, some of her crochet work, and some of she used to make little miniature like jewelry boxes that were made in the shape of miniature furniture, miniature sofas and chairs. So she got a substantial order from the salesman, uh, an order large enough to serve as a down payment for the refrigerator. She was very, despite the fact that she didn't have the formal education, she was a true leader in many organizations in her church, and became the superintendent of Sunday school in her church. She loved to garden. She had beautiful flowers and vegetables, which she grew in our backyard. She was an organic gardener. She used to say my father loved to fish, so there was always plenty of fish, on our tables, on our table, or in our refrigerator, in our freezer. But she used to save, after she cleaned them, she saved the fish heads and used them in her garden. And she had some beautiful tomatoes, cucumbers and peppers. We could never afford more than one chicken, and that was for my mother, my father, and the 5 of us children. So my mother used to eat the back. My father always had the breast, and then the other parts we'd scramble for. But my mother stretched her portion by eating the chicken feet. I used to have to go to the market each week, and we couldn't afford more than one chicken. But my mother would always instruct me to ask for extra head and feet. So not only did I have to take the chicken's feet, one pair of feet, I had to ask for extras, and I was embarrassed to ask for extra head and feet. And so when I'd go to the market, I would wait until all the other customers were served so that no one would hear me asking for these extra head and feet. And that worked all right, except on one occasion, people kept coming, and I was waiting for the opportunity to be alone to order my extra head and feet. And when it seemed that that wasn't going to happen, I said, I'm going home, and I'll just tell Mother that they didn't have any extra head and feet. So that's what I did. Now, it's embarrassing enough to ask for head and feet when you're buying the chicken, but to be sent back to ask for head and feet without ordering a chicken, that was really embarrassing. Another time, the shopping bag broke, and the heads poking out of the side of the bag. That was kind of embarrassing too. But if you go in the supermarkets today, they sell for a lot of money. They sell for a lot of money. Whoever thought you'd be paying $1.79 a pound for chicken feet? Yeah. I graduated from high school in 1946, June 46, and I left to live in New York in April of 1947. About 4 or 5 months after I arrived there, I went with a girlfriend of mine to a dance, and she spotted Louis Sargent, who was a friend of hers, and Bertram Sargent, a friend of hers, and she said hello to them and beckoned for them to come to our table. She wanted me to meet Bertram Sargent. Bertram was well known among the ladies, but it was Louis Sargent who spotted me, and actually he and Bert were leaving at the time that they saw us. He handed Bert his coat, came over and asked me to dance, and then we danced several times, and then we made a date, and we saw each other for 4 years before we were married. And we lived for a short time. Well, it seemed an eternity. We didn't have our own apartment. We lived in my in-laws' home, and finally we were able to get a place of our own in Williamsburg Houses. That was one development in New York City's public housing system. And we lived there for a couple of years before we moved to Manhattan. Well, we were the first family to move in. In fact, the halls had not been covered yet, and I was very proud of your father's performance at Lenox Terrace. Every time I walked off 135th Street onto the driveway leading to the building, I looked around, and it was kind of awesome that he had responsibility not only for that one building, but for what would be 6 buildings, each of them comprising 170 families. He was and very, very well respected by the tenants. The old timers remember his roughness at times, but they also remember how thorough he was, how well he provided services for them. And to this day, people still speak of his good service.
In 1971, after 25 years as part of a couple, Doris realized that she was destined to be a bigger person than would be possible with Louis. Her separation returned her to Brooklyn, first to Lewis Avenue, and later to Turner Towers, where she pursued and received a bachelor's degree, learned to ski and ride a bike for the first time. She found her life's work as a floriculture specialist for the New York City Department of Housing, where she managed several hundred urban gardens and presided over workshops and competitions. She became an avid traveler, and her wanderlust would take her to the Caribbean, to Africa, to Europe, Alaska, and notably Cuba with her beloved Great Day Chorale. Indeed, she lived a wonderful life.